Welcome to the Great Canadian Leadership Podcast, proudly brought to you by the Great Canadian Training and Consulting Company. Thank you for joining us today in our search for what makes a great communicator. I'm your host, Joel Silverstone, and every episode we'll be speaking with leaders and experts on how they were able to use their communication skills to inspire, create trust, collaboration, and influence others all in a respectful manner. How did they do it? What did they do to get better? How did they adapt? Where did they fail? Listeners and viewers, if you are looking to improve your communication skills and take those steps to being the next great leader in business, you're in the right place. Enjoy the podcast. Our episode is about communicating in your style. And what does that mean? It means that when you do that, people are going to believe you and trust you. So here's the question. When you're communicating, does it feel natural? Or are you trying to copy someone else's style? We've got with us Joy Neuhold, who will be sharing how she discovered her style and then sharing the tips and insights on how leaders and all of us can find our communication style. Joy Neuhold is the co-owner of the Great Canadian Training and Consulting Company since 2002 and CompuWay since 2013. Joy started her professional path by working in small, then working in big businesses, and then Joy was quickly promoted and started doing internal projects and training. She then decided she was going to take a 2-month leave to backpack through Europe. And when she came back, she knew that she wanted to start her own business and surround herself with amazing, hardworking, and passionate people. This episode is going to be about finding your communication style, which is a key to communicating effectively. Let's meet our guest, Joy Neuhold. Welcome to the Great Canadian Leadership Podcast. Joy Neuhold, it is so good to have you on the show.
Joel, thank you for having me here. I'm really excited.
Well, this is an exciting topic that we're going to talk about, communicate in your style. This is, everybody would like to believe or would like to know how to be able to do this. And yourself, working with so many leaders and yourself in a leadership role, you've had a chance to really absorb this and see this in action and see what works. So let's start with the big question, which is, what is communicate in your style? In your own words, how do you see it?
Absolutely. You need to be communicating in a genuine fashion. So sometimes we'll learn really good things from different people we know, but that may not be the way you communicate. So for example, maybe you're not a storyteller, and then you're trying to tell a story. And if that's not your style, it doesn't come across properly, right? Maybe you're a quiet person, so it doesn't mean you have to be the lively person in the room. It's still okay to be quiet. It's just then you have your own style of communicating.
You know, that is so true. I've seen so many leaders who feel that they've gotten into this role and they feel they have to be, for lack of a better word, more of an authority figure. And so they lost a lot of their own personality, their own community, their own way that if you speak to them one-on-one, they're a different person. So is that what that means? Is that the trap that people get into?
I think so. I think it's sometimes learned behavior. There's a perception of how you should communicate, right? Like you should walk in the room and just lay down how we're going to do everything. And if that's not your communication style, it just doesn't come across properly.
Right. It's just not going to be effective. People are not going to buy it. And then it's an uphill battle after that. So, before we talk about, what you've experienced and how did you learn that, everyone wants to know now, what do you think your communication style is?
I love humor. Obviously, it has to be appropriate and professional. And I'm a storyteller.
Nice. Yeah. And humor, as you said, appropriate. It's sometimes people confuse humor with telling jokes, which is not. Like how do you know that, humor was good for you and that, storytelling worked for you? Was there something that sort of triggered it for you, especially like the storytelling?
I realize, like, even in my everyday life, if I'm hanging out with my friends and stuff, like, we're always telling stories. I think for humor, I personally can see the humorous side of even a difficult situation. But again, you're absolutely right. I'm not going to walk into the room in a difficult situation and start a stand-up act and stuff, right? You have to read the room. But even in training and stuff, things can be technical, but I mean, there can be humor in it. You can kind of laugh at sometimes that, oh, this is so silly, like that it has to be this difficult, or,
Right.
you can kind of see the lighter side of things.
Yeah, and humor brings levity towards a situation. It could be difficult training, or and saying sometimes what everybody might be thinking, and bring some lightness to it. It relieves the stress in the room, relieves the pressure in the room, and realizes that we can have fun, we can learn, but we can also
Yeah.
have fun.
Yeah.
So how did you learn this, you think? Like, this is great. Like, you realize in your own natural style, you're talking with your friends, you realize, oh, humor and storytelling is a big part of what I do naturally. How did you learn this in the corporate world, in the business world?
Sure. So when I actually started with my first job, I was actually extraordinarily nervous and I had a hard
Mm.
time speaking up, speaking to people in charge. And so I kept volunteering for hard jobs. At one point, they needed us to take over and cover customer services lines. And you know what? I covered the lines. It was an insurance company. So my first phone call was actually a client that said he didn't appreciate our phone number had the letters in it and not the
Oh,
numbers. And I should do something about that. Right. Again, I can
right.
see the humor in that.
Sure.
Like, I'm just like a random customer service person, but I said, okay, thank you. I'll pass that on. Right.
Good tip.
And good tip. Yeah. But then it moved on to I got to do my first training session. And honestly, I don't know if I actually ever would have considered training before this.
Hmm.
And I was training people on a topic, and the group of people were a little bit higher than me. And so I guess I was adventurous and I decided I volunteered to do this training session. And so where we worked, it was really interesting that we had a section in the building that was conference rooms and training rooms. And they had this funny kind of leftover room and they built the building. And it was like this really bizarre shape. So, I mean, of
Right.
course you would say, let's make it a training room, right? So we ended up getting that room. And a few minutes into starting the session, you can imagine how nervous I am. And you can
Sure.
prep as much as you want, but you got to do that first one, right?
Yeah.
So I start backing up as I'm talking, and I landed in a garbage can, and it was a cartoon, right? So think of like Roadrunner and
Uh,
stuff. I was
yeah.
folded in half in this garbage can. So it was kind of one of those moments where everything kind of goes in slow motion.
Yeah.
And and I have two ways to react. I could start crying because like that could have happened, right? I
Right.
just took a breath, started laughing. The room started laughing. I pulled the garbage can off, flung
Right.
it out of my way, and just kind of kept going, right? And that was kind of a moment for me where there is a lot of unpredictability sometimes in
Yeah.
leadership kind of conversations and training situations, and sometimes you have to laugh and keep moving. I mean, that really could have I also could have taken it and just never done training again.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. You didn't take, it's, you're not taking yourself seriously, but you're taking the work seriously. And you didn't come
absolutely.
out of that pretzel mode, out of the garbage can, and apologize. And you showed a lot of confidence and poise in just laughing it off and go, these things happen.
Yep.
And,
I think
and
it's
you're
rare,
okay with
but
it.
those things happen. Yeah.
But
That specific thing is rare.
accidents happen, and
Yeah,
now, as we're doing so much, people are doing communication remotely. Accidents happen with technology, and it's just finding the humor in it
absolutely.
is so good about that story and communication style. So our listeners now are thinking, okay, well, this is great. So Joy found it because she went from being, shy, let's say, to
Hmm.
challenging herself to go and deliver the training, and then this, 1 in a million incident happens,
Yeah.
and then it just takes just alleviates the moment and just gives her voice. She realized, I'm okay with it. This is my voice. I'm a storyteller, and I can find humor in this.
Mm.
So now listeners want to know how, if I don't have these moments, how do I find my style?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is I don't know that I always recommend that kind of I
Right.
forget the saying, but like the you're just kind of thrown into the deep end. I don't know if I would
Right.
personally recommend that. It worked for me. But I
Right.
think you can think back in the last few interactions you've had and think about
Hmm.
times where you felt really comfortable and the conversation went really well. And then think of times where maybe you were really uncomfortable, and then what
Mm-hmm.
was different in the
Right.
first situation where you're comfortable. Could it be that you had a heads up, I have a difficult conversation coming up, I can think about who the audience is, how I want to respond? Was I uncomfortable because I didn't have the numbers and I was expected, to give responses, and they were based on information I didn't have, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's the first step. The next step is the next few interactions you're in. Think of the people you're interacting in. Can you read their body language? Because that's also really important.
Right.
I've Back when I was a trainer, I remember there'd be times you could just read the person's language. It was just like, you know what? Just get right to the point. Show them what they want. Don't tell them a story about something recent. They don't want to hear about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can you read people's body language so that you can learn to kind of adjust what you're saying? Um,
Right.
I think as like you grow, right? Because a lot of people, they specialize or they do something really well, and then they're put in this position to manage, which is a completely different position. We don't always know how to manage other
Right.
people. So, I mean, you can then start with, do you have a close friend or an associate or colleague that you can start having that conversation about communication, how to respond to things? Do you have a
Mm-hmm.
really good boss or manager you can reach out to that can, help you with that kind of thing, almost as like a mentor? And then I think future, right, as you grow in your career, do you need coaching, right? Someone to help you when these situations kind of come up, or to learn some of these skills. And then training, of course, goes along with that.
Right, right. So it's a journey of a bit of trial and error and testing it out. But I think it sounds like the
Hmm.
most important thing to finding your communication style is getting some feedback on your style.
Hmm.
What works? What have you observed in me from a friend, maybe from a boss, from a manager, from a colleague? What have you observed in
Hmm.
me? And then also the second part, I guess, of this is what do you observe in others? When you're talking, when do you notice that people seem to be engaged, and when do people seem to be disengaged? And
Hmm.
then you start to find that truth, and it probably find that moment of like when you're really being you find your style is when people are engaged because they believe you when you're doing that.
Absolutely. And feels a lot more natural for sure.
Feels more natural. There we go.
Yeah.
And now it's time, Joy, if you're ready. This is a segment of show that we like to
Yep.
call failure. Ta-da! And so this is where was that
Yeah.
learning point in your journey where might have felt like
Yeah.
a failure at the time, but really became a moment to learn and grow from that. So
Yeah.
do you have one you feel comfortable sharing with us?
I do. I actually think
Okay.
back to a time when I had to train someone on something,
Mm-hmm.
and um, it didn't actually go so well. And my I had a really good manager, and so she took me aside and said to me, when you originally were being trained, you said this didn't work.
Mm.
Now you're doing the same thing, right?
Mm.
You need to change how you're training and communicating with this person. And so you're right, at the moment it feels like a failure, but I took time to kind of think about it, and it made
Right.
me realize like I needed to be training this person in my style of
Mm.
communication, not mimicking the way that I was trained.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good lesson and great feedback and so timely that someone was able to point out something that maybe wasn't a failure, but just was could have felt a bit embarrassing. Oh, but deep down yeah,
Hmm.
there's truth to it, and again you put it into action and you start to develop and find confidence in your communication style. Joy, this has been great
Absolutely.
to learn about communicating in your style. Where can we find out more or get in touch with Joy Neuhold?
Absolutely. So I'm actually one of the co-owners of Great Canadian Training. So you can always reach me at joy@greatcanadiantraining.ca. And you can also reach out to me at Joy Neuhold on LinkedIn.
Very easy. Joy, thank you so much for sharing Communicating with Style on the Great Canadian Leadership Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And now it's time for our 3 stars, no trois étoiles. These are the 3 takeaways from today's episode that you can start to put into practice. Number 1, what's my style? Ask for feedback. Ask a friend, a colleague, a mentor, a coach. Am I funny? Do I share anecdotes, storytell, facts? Am I thoughtful? What's my style? Number 2, how do I know I'm being real? Does it feel natural? As Joy said, Or are you copying someone else's style? Number 3, what do you observe? Adapt. Keep to your communication style, but read the room, see the clues and cues. Do you need to give more? Do you need to give less? And of course, you can always take communication skills training or get some coaching on communication skills. So, what's the next step? Well, if you're not sure where you can apply these 3 stars in business or maybe even in life, try this. If you're not funny, that's okay. Don't be funny. It's not your style. Enjoy. Thank you for joining us in our search for what makes a great communicator. If you enjoyed the show, then please leave a rating or review. Even better, subscribe to the Great Canadian Leadership Podcast and make sure you don't miss another episode. Let's stay connected. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram at GCT_Compues. And if you'd like more information, free resources, or class schedules on everything from software to soft skills training, consulting, or coaching, then go on over to greatcanadiantraining.ca. Thank you, and we will see you next episode.